Welcome, everybody. Sorry we're getting started a few minutes late. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to having some weather issues interrupting your tech here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in Eugene. My apartment doesn't have power, but I found somewhere that did. So the show goes on. All right, we've got a lot of people filing in. We'll give them just another moment. We had over 150 people register for this, so that's really exciting. Hopefully everyone who registered will be able to make it. I know that a lot of Oregon is dealing with this fun ice storm, but hopefully most of you can make it. All right. There's Josh. Okay, well, I'll get started with some introductions. My name is Katie. I'm the Education and Outreach Manager for Oregon Shores. And for over 50 years, Oregon Shores has served as the state's leading voice when it comes to protecting the beaches, headlands, landscapes, and ecosystems that make Oregon's coast so spectacular and loved. Our vision is for a healthy and resilient Oregon coast where all people and nature thrive together. And we work towards achieving that by engaging, educating, and empowering people to protect and increase the resilience of the coast ecosystems, landscapes, and communities. As a nonprofit, our work is only possible because of generous support from people like all of you. If you enjoy our presentation tonight and want to help us continue to protect the coast and educate the public, please go ahead and sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date with what we're doing. Follow us on social media. That always helps get the word out, or consider making a gift on our website today. So to get started, we have Josh McInnes here. He is a Canadian ecologist with a marine biology and ecology background, and he brings a decade of experience studying killer whale populations across diverse locations from Antarctica to the Bering Sea. And as a research coordinator at Marine Life Studies and a member of various international killer whale research initiatives, Josh is at the forefront of cetacean ecology. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and submit those into the question and answer box, and I will relay them to Josh at the end of the presentation. So Josh, take it away. Josh, you're muted.
There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be keeping my screen off just for the bandwidth issues. I know everybody's having internet issues, so hopefully this will enable for a faster webinar and no issues. So I'm going to share screen here. Bring up our presentation. Okay. Okay. Oop. There we go. So thank you so much for the introduction, Katie. As Katie mentioned, I'm a marine ecologist. I'm with the University of British Columbia's Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries. That's in Vancouver, BC, and I'm also with the Pacific Wildlife Foundation, which is also in Vancouver as well. But even though I'm situated in Vancouver, a lot of my work is in California and Oregon, and I'll explain a little bit about why that is, even though we all know that killer whales are very famous in Washington and in BC. Why am I in Oregon and California? Well, first off, I have been working with killer whales for a long time. I grew up on the North Coast, North Vancouver Island, and along this also South Vancouver Island, where I spent a lot of time watching killer whales or orcas, starting in 1995, and then my research started in 2006. And I've been very lucky to be able to spend a lot of time with these animals. So today's presentation is going to be not too long because I'm worried people are also going to lose internet. We're in a bit of a snowstorm here in Vancouver, and I'll kind of go from there. But we can also afterwards talk and have a lot of questions and discussion. So a lot of our research has been focused on trying to better understand the community structure of population of killer whales we know as transients or an ecotype, and I'll explain a little bit about them. This is kind of what we do on a daily basis. It's not all fun and glory being on the ocean, but we do spend a lot of times at the university, libraries, working away consistently on data and analyzing photographs of individual whales from our very small window of field work, which is about a month or two every year. The rest of it's writing and doing all the the sciencey things that most people really don't like doing. They'd rather be out there watching whales. So why Oregon? So we have been really curious about the distribution of particular transient killer whale groups, and I'll explain what transients are in a few minutes. But we're interested also in resident killer whales and where they go during the winter, in spring, outside of the main region of the Salish Sea or of Washington and BC. So Oregon, though, has kind of been a bit of a gray box. We don't really know anything about it. What we do know a lot about is where killer whales are in Washington, where they are in British Columbia, where they are in California, and Alaska, but we really don't know a lot about Oregon. And the big question is this area kind of a dead zone for killer whales? Why might that be? Is it because of effort or people just not reporting? These are kind of the big questions that kind of came to my mind, especially with some of the research I'm conducting at the university. We're trying to really make a connection between the whole entire coast, and Oregon was this big question mark. So a little background on killer whales. There's very little published information on killer whales along the Oregon coast. And one of the first studies was actually a population study that was conducted in the 1980s by Green et al. As you can see here, this table here I've highlighted, this is killer whales here. And you can see Oregon, there was 24 individuals are photographed in 8 different groups of whales that were seen. And then you can see Washington, Washington in the total. So this area right here, there's not a lot. And what's really interesting about this paper was that a lot of the killer whales that were photographed during the study and compared to killer whales, say in Washington State and British Columbia, were new to science. They weren't cataloged before. People didn't know who they were. So that's also something that's really interesting. But that was even back in the 1980s. And then if you look at this horrific photograph here of a killer whale that was captured and killed in the Columbia River near Portland. This was in the early 1930s. When this killer whale was captured, it was basically found way up the Columbia River near Portland and Vancouver, Washington. And it was actually killed by some fishermen, weighed and unfortunately, there was no stomach contents, so we don't know if it was a resident fish eating or a transient mammal eating. But this is kind of the gist of what we know for Oregon for killer whale stuff. So that was really what really piqued my interest, is how do we get further and move on to understanding maybe where's the junction between Oregon, California, and Washington? Where's that connection? So we did a bit of a trip down the coast the last few years. I got to admit, Oregon's probably one of my favorite places in the whole world now. I am excited always to just get in the car, drive across the border, and head down. I spend a lot of time in Oregon, and often every year I'll drive down through the Oregon coast to California, where we do a lot of field work in Monterey as well. This is a photograph of the Depot Bay Whale Watching Center. So it's a place where a lot of people go to watch the gray whale migration, both south and north. As well as other species. It's got a great vantage point. It's one run by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And you can also see here lots of these old posters that were put up by NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service, mostly with the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, asking for reports of killer whales. In particular, trying to follow the presence of the fish-eating resident killer whales that move down the coast. So this is kind of was an initial send in reports, but still there isn't a lot of information. So we reached out to the community in Oregon, really trying to get to know the individual people, trying to learn from the fishermen, from people that are just along the shore, the aquariums, other research institutes, to build a collaboration, to get to know and get people involved, to try to figure out where they see killer whales, what time of the year. So this is a photograph by Cape Mears here. You can see there's information on killer whales for sure, so they are seen by people. And then also our friends at the Oregon Coast Aquarium, who've been really supportive. And we spend a lot of time just collaborating and going over information. But killer whales are everywhere in Oregon. They're on murals. This is a mural in Newport. Some killer whales just down in the fishing district. Here's one in Walport. It's a killer whale sharing, I think it's a coffee with some seals. I'm not sure why. And then this is in Bend in Oregon, another mural. And there's more murals. This is just a couple of examples of just the spread of interest in killer whales it seems in Oregon. So where are they? are they around? Is it just something that people are interested in because they see pictures in Washington? Really, what is the situation in Oregon? So we developed this a community outreach, and we developed a program called the Oregon Coast Killer Whale Monitoring Program. This is actually a photograph of two individual transient killer whales that were seen almost all spring last year, off and on throughout the coastal area of Oregon. This is a shot from just in Florence in the Sluagh Jetty, and you can kind of see them. They're kind of moving in. They're just moving out towards the open ocean. So our objectives are to provide a baseline census study of killer whales off the Oregon coast. We're going to provide information on the ecology, behavior, and habitat requirements, in particular the transient or mammal hunting population. We're going to provide a reliable network for reporting sightings of southern resident killer whales, which is pretty exciting. We've been getting a lot more sightings of them, especially offshore, which we directly share with Northwest Fisheries Science Center, who manages a lot of the southern resident sightings, like scientists like Brad Hansen, Candace Emmons. We share a lot of information with them. But then also just providing a monitoring program built on a community engagement is super important. So for me, not being a local to Oregon just yet, I really do want this to become something that Oregon locals can really be prideful in being engaging in, being taking part in these kind of observations and being able to witness killer whales. So what's really cool is we created a social network. This is a community group for Oregon, locals in Oregon, that's now over 10,200 people. We're working with, we have volunteers now that are helping. You can see a photo here. This is an art piece that we're giving out posters when we were down the coast. And we now figured out, it's quite interesting, from the 10,200 people from Oregon, a lot of locals have now sent in photographs, both recent as well as historical information on killer whales off Oregon. And we're now able to identify, I think last year we identified 98% of all the killer whale sightings, which there was close to 70 sightings. We were able to catalog or identify every single whale that was present off the Oregon coast that were reported. So first off, though, I kind of jumped around talking about transients there quickly and residents, but we do have three different forms of killer whale that are off the Oregon coast. As I mentioned, the transient type here, which is our main study population, is typically found in groups of between 1 and 12. Natural lines are usually about 5 to 6 animals, which is a family group of a mother and her offspring. They prefer marine mammal prey, so we got like marine mammals like seals, sea lions, and small cetaceans like whales and porpoises, and large cetaceans, whales. And then also we have this other form, the residents, which I'm assuming a lot of people, follow the southern residents, and J, K, and L pod, and those are the three main pods that seem to move their way south to the Oregon coast. And their preferred prey is salmon. They also eat other fish species, but Chinook salmon seems to be the major their major food source. Then lastly, though, offshore, we have these what we call offshores, which predominantly frequent the continental shelf breaks, so just offshore towards the open ocean, your submarine canyon systems, and they're believed to feed on larger trophic level or top predator fish species like sharks. And you can see here, just based on this dietary difference or niche that's between the three ecotypes, their teeth also are quite different. This is a photograph of the different types, the different shapes of the teeth that we see here. What's really interesting too is that transients, residents, and offshores are genetically separate. They do not associate, but they live sympatrically within the same region. So you can occasionally see transients and residents within the same area, but often they avoid each other or spend most of their time separate. But we also, with the residents, we have another population we call the northern residents, and we have seen a couple of sightings of them off the Oregon coast as well, which is the furthest south that they've been identified. But most of their distribution is further north, Southeast Alaska, North Vancouver Island, and outer coastal Washington. So I'm going to focus on the transient. These guys are the most commonly encountered as well as reported ecotype of killer whale off the Oregon coast, but I'll have little bits of information on the others as we go along as well. So transient killer whales, though, this is a big picture really when it comes to population. So as I mentioned, there's three different ecotypes. They differ genetically as well as acoustically. They sound different. But we also there's a hierarchy as well. Within the transient population, we also have different genetically distinct populations. So for instance, the population that we predominantly see along the coast of Oregon, is what we call the West Coast transients here in purple. And you can see they're up in Southeast Alaska here, all the way down British Columbia, down the outer coast of Washington into Oregon. And then there's another little subgrouping within that we call the outer coast transients, which intermix. They do associate with some of these other West Coast individuals, but spend most of their time offshore. And they've been a substantial part of the research we're conducting. It's because we don't know a lot about their distribution or what they are doing out there on the open ocean. Other populations, though, is we have this large, broad population called the Gulf of Alaska transients, which now is also known as the Gulf of Alaska Aleutian Islands Bering Sea population. And they frequent, like I said, the Aleutian Islands into the Bering Sea, around Kodiak Island here up into the Gulf of Alaska, and even down into northern British Columbia as well. There's been sightings of them. And there's a lot of question marks regarding what their actual status is. They likely are more than one population again, but we still have more work to do on that population. And a lot of that work is being done at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center's National Marine Mammal Laboratory. And then this little blue dot here, this is Prince William Sound in Alaska. There's a group called the AT1 transients, which are critically endangered. They will likely go extinct within the next 20 to 30 years due to the fact that there's only 7 individuals left and no reproductive female. So our big question was, this started in 2015, was what was the presence of killer whales off of Oregon and California? So we conducted a population study with different survey methods. One of them being small vessel surveys, where we went out and did focal follows, as well as collected information on photo identification of individual whales. We also had whale watchers report information, and then also our collaborators at NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, were conducting surveys up to around 500 kilometers offshore, and they were also providing information from their historic sightings in their databases. So we compiled all this information from 2006 to 2018, and we analyzed it, looked at what the patterns were. So this is how we identify killer whales. This is a large male we know as OCT 60. He's also named Liner. But as you can tell, you can see on this gray area we call a saddle patch has these scars. And these scars are distinct for with all individual whales. It's like a fingerprint, as well as the shape of this dorsal fin. You can see up here there's a bit of it looks like a little bit of a rivet or a notch in here. And based on these photographs, these congenital features stay with these animals their entire lives. And we're able to catalog them to get a population estimate or a census done. So from this study, we found that from 2006 to 2018, killer whales were encountered 146 times. We analyzed over 113,000 photographs. So it was definitely a lot of time in the lab in our offices working away. We have a total of 150 individuals were photo identified, as well as 30 matrilineal groups. So that's a mother and her offspring, which I'll show you in the next slide. And then we found potentially 3 putative subpopulations. So as I mentioned back here, this West Coast population, even though it's one of the best studied, being in British Columbia, Washington, and Alaska, we still don't know a lot about the inner workings of this population because there seems to be subpopulations within it, or clusters that seem to have their own specific habitats, like this outer coast group here. So first off, it's weird. Okay, that did not work. For this big database, we found that there appears to be a coastal as well as this outer coast group. Up here at the top, you can see this individual whales that are typically found near the coast, close to shore, often in bays, in jetties, in near straits, inlets, around rocky reefs. They're typically in there hunting seals and sea lions and small porpoises. And then there's this outer coast group that's frequents further offshore that is found near the continental shelf break. So that distinguishes from the continental shelf coastal waters from the open ocean, as well as near canyon systems and seamounts. But occasionally we see the two mixing. So this here is a, hopefully it works. Here we go. So this is a map from our data up to 2021. And this shows just kind of both latitudinally as well as longitudinally the difference in these inner coast and outer coast groups. One being, we see here, this inner coast group in yellow is really focused inshore within 5 kilometers. You can see right down in Oregon here, lots of sightings along the coast. So a lot of the killer whales that we're getting reports of belong to this coastal transient group that specializes on small pinnipeds like harbor seals and sea lions. But then you can see out here, even further out, this is continental shelf break in black. This is where we get into in the slope right here. This is the continental shelf slope. So this is around the 200-meter isopath. And as you get further offshore here, this kind of juts into the open ocean. And then you can see latitudinally down in, this is Monterey, California, down to Southern California. This is the real distribution of the California current, which is an eastern transboundary nutrient-rich water mass that moves south from southern BC down to Southern California. And this population really is kind of spread out differently and uses this habitat differently. So from this study, we published a 2021 catalog, and it's publicly available through NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center. It's a technical memorandum that actually highlights all this work, as well as the photo identification, those images of the saddle patch and dorsal fin for all the killer whales that we saw. We also have another one coming out soon. We'll be updating, hopefully in 2024, which will be an update on this one. And I can tell you already, the population or the number of animals that we've identified has grown quite a bit. It's gone from 150 to over 200 animals now. And that's including new calves as well as new animals that we had previously not identified from offshore waters. What's even more cool is a third cluster that we found that we're really confused on. It's animals that occur primarily greater than 65 kilometers from shore, with most sightings occurring between 200 to 300 kilometers. And we believe that they're potentially an oceanic population that frequents these deep waters. So this is an animal right here we know as OCX, outer coast for the OC, and then X is just basically the unknown. And this animal here was seen feeding on a pygmy sperm whale. And you can see black-footed albatross, these big, large oceanic birds are kind of picking at the scraps. But what's really unique about these animals that we've identified so far, a total of 40 different whales, is that we have no links in association between these whales and any killer whale that's been photo identified or encountered in the northeastern Pacific. That's including offshores, transients, or resident killer whales. We also encountered them feeding primarily on marine mammals, which is quite interesting. So sperm whales, pygmy sperm whale, elephant seals, oceanic dolphins, like Risso's dolphins, so things that are really open ocean pelagic. And what's really cool is that they have these scars from this mesopelagic parasitic shark we know as a cookie cutter shark. And these cookie cutter sharks really make these big nasty wounds on vertebrates or large marine mammals and fish. And they just rasp off the skin. You can see it's got this cookie cutter looking mouth. And what's really neat about this is that these sharks are only really found in water between 15 and 26 degrees Celsius. So, and in deep pelagic ecosystems, so far from shore. So really kind of providing some evidence that these whales are really spending their time off in these deep waters. And the fact that these killer whales have these markings shows that, and that are not seen in the more coastal transients or resident killer whales, shows that these animals are really pelagic in distribution. I'm excited to say that 2 days ago, a paper we had finished on oceanic killer whales was accepted in a scientific journal. So we'll likely be out in the next couple months, and we'll have that posted as well for people to read. So what's going on in Oregon? So this is a transient killer whale that was seen feeding in a kelp bed just off the Oregon coast. And this is kind of what we've been seeing in the last, between 2008 and 2021. So a total of 222 distinct killer whale observations were recorded from that period, with 118 animals photo identified. And as you can see here, transients to the red were 108 observations of mostly coastal transients along here. You can see banded, and this is a little bit biased here because these are near centers where a lot of people are. So you can see Depot Bay, Lincoln City, Newport, especially Newport. There's a lot of people looking. Florence, Bandon. These are all real concentrated areas where there's a lot of people spending their time near the coast. But we also got a good spread of data too from even further north, Cannon Beach up into the Columbia River. Southern residents, we've got 5 sightings of. Especially there's one up in Columbia here, some near Depot Bay, just further offshore, further south Bandon, but still really close to the coast. We have offshore killer whales, so the ones in the chart. We have 3 different reports of offshores. You can see they're much further from shore than where the other killer whale ecotypes were found. Northern resident sighting, we have one report of a northern resident sighting up here, quite far offshore, which was really interesting because they're similar to southern residents and being more distributed along the coast. But we're starting to find that, especially off the outer coast of Washington, that northern residents are spending more time near deep sea fishing banks and near the continental shelf break. And then we have one oceanic sighting way out here off Oregon. That was the furthest offshore that we've got record for oceanics. And then the oceanics, we see more of them off of California as well. Probable transients was 104, not shown here, but we had an additional 104 that we could not identify to individuals, but were presumed to be transient based on the group size that was reported, and within the time span that individual whales were being seen, within a week. And this is kind of what we're seeing here. So this is from 2008 to 2021, based on effort that's continuously been reported from individuals that are close to the coast. And what we're really seeing is a bit of a seasonal fluctuation, with most sightings being in May and June. And right now we're analyzing the data for 2022 and 2023, and it's showing the same pattern. A lot more sightings occurring in May, June, which is kind of in contrast to British Columbia and Washington, which I don't have here. But in Washington and British Columbia, we see most of the sightings in that area for transient killer whales being in August, September. And what's really interesting is that we're actually matching the movements of individual whales between the spring down in Oregon up into British Columbia. So they're moving between the Oregon coast and British Columbia and Washington State. And what we're thinking is potentially the issue for this is that it's likely related to their main prey, harbor seals, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So most encounters of transient killer whales occurred during the spring. We had a total of 102 photo-identified transient killer whales. A total of 23 transient matrilineal groups were identified off Oregon. And we also believe that the Oregon coast is kind of a special region. And when I mention that is that we believe that potentially that we get quite a mixing of groups from the outer coast group, from California and offshore, and in the more coastal or inner coast group off Oregon. So there seems to be more association in the Oregon region between these two compared to, say, just off of California, where we see more outer coast animals, or more inner coast animals just in British Columbia and Washington. This is what we believe is kind of driving the seasonal presence of transient killer whales off the Oregon coast. And this is a map that was created quite a long time ago, showing what we call a seasonal climb in the reproductive patterns of harbor seals. So harbor seals are the most common identified marine mammal, and most abundant marine mammal in the Pacific Northwest. But what's really interesting about their life history is that they tend to have this difference in birthing when they time to have their birthing. So it gets earlier as you head north, and then later as you head south a bit. But then it also starts to get earlier again as you start to head south, and then later. And then earlier even more. But the two main areas to look at here is, say, British Columbia and Washington State off of Vancouver Island. We typically get between August and September for this area. And then off of Oregon, you can see it's more May, June. So when the harbor seals are starting to have more of their pups during this time. And it's been shown in several studies that transient killer whales do show seasonal patterns of occurrence off of Washington State and British Columbia during the August through September period when harbor seals are having their pups. So we're just kind of starting to touch on trying to understand what that pattern is happening off the Oregon coast. So hunting behaviors with transients are really interesting. We see a whole range, as well as we've observed and reported quite a few different species of marine mammal that are fed upon by transients off Oregon. We've seen harbor seals, we've seen stellar sea lions, California sea lions, northern elephant seals, harbor porpoise, and gray whale calves. And you can see here, this is kind of just a small little art diagram showing kind of some different behaviors like catapulting, throwing a seal through the air, or pursuit porpoising, where they often will breach straight out of the air chasing a dolphin or a porpoise, and then also drowning behavior where they'll kind of grab onto a gray whale and try to submerge it underneath the water. But before we go into more details about foraging behavior, group size, though, typically what we see with transient killer whales off Oregon has been groups of around 4 or 5 animals. And like I said, most of the transients that we're seeing off Oregon are more of the coastal animals that are being recorded really close to shore. And these are the same animals that we're seeing that occasionally move into Washington and BC. But hunting is really interesting. See if that shows up. There we go. So this animal here, this is an encounter that happened last year just offshore Newport. It was a group of transients we knew. Actually, it was 3 different inner coast whales and 1 outer coast transient that were traveling together. And they were hunting this harbor seal. And it was quite the hunt. As you can see here, the harbor seal, this went on for about 25 minutes where the killer whales kind of rammed and grabbed onto the harbor seal through the air. They continually played with it. And at the end, you can see here at this arrow here, the harbor seal being dragged. It's now dead and they're dragging it beneath the surface and prey sharing this animal. And from our preliminary analysis, harbor seals seem to be also the dominant prey for at least the coastal individuals off Oregon, which has been mirrored in other studies in Washington and BC. But I think the most exciting part of this presentation is what we've been understanding about killer whale interactions with large cetaceans like gray whales. So with Oregon, it's really kind of piqued my interest is that there's been lots of reports. Once we started this monitoring program, there's been a lot of reports without pictures of killer whales. There'd be park rangers or people walking along the shore. They'd see a killer whale's harassing a gray whale, mother and calf, but there was no pictures to identify who the whales were. And what we do know from our studies in California, further south off Monterey, is that the outer coast transients down there are very much gray whale hunting specialists. They arrive seasonally in the spring around April, May to hunt gray whale calves. But as the gray whales start to migrate north in the spring, they leave the California area. Killer whale presence in California decreases. So what is happening with the gray whales as they kind of make their way north off of Oregon is kind of the big question mark. Are killer whales also preying on them based on some of these anecdotal reports? So with this monitoring program, we've been able to really kind of hone in on the individuals. And our initial hypothesis, which was that some of the outer coast animals are likely following gray whales north, may still hold, but we're finding that some of the transients that we typically see in Washington and BC are actually the main culprits or the main predators hunting gray whales, which is something we don't see very often in BC and Washington. And some of these more coastal transients are really kind of been hunting gray whales. And this was a famous encounter that happened last year off of Cape Perpetua, where a large group of transients, there was over 12, attacked a gray whale mom and calf. And then actually the day before, though, a gray whale calf was found dead off the sea lion caves. And a colleague of ours, Jim Rice at OSU, Oregon State University, was able to confirm from a necropsy, which is an animal autopsy, that the gray whale calf was killed by transients. So that previous one was a separate calf, and then the next day when this event happened with these killer whales, they had also went after this calf and killed it as well. And this is some spectacular footage that was shared from our community of people. You can see here the female's trying to keep the calf alive at the surface here, where transients are kind of surfacing around. But she was unfortunately not able to, and the transients were able to. You can see the mother here just underneath the surface, but they have the calf here already dead, and they were feeding on it. And the next day, this calf was found. I'm hoping this video will work. I apologize if it doesn't. I really wanted to show some videos that were submitted by some of our colleagues in the community of what really went on during this hunt. Just one sec here. I won't play the whole video, but as you can see here, there's the gray whales in the middle there, and you can see the transients that are just kind of forcing themselves, ramming the gray whale calf, circling it, and you can see smacking it with her flukes. And you can see the gray whale at the surface. There's some blood there just behind it too as well, and the transients are just kind of really going after it right here. This is a bit of a longer video, but this was taken right out of Cape Perpetual, just looking at the water from the shore. All right. Here's another video that was taken using drone, short clip. I could play it again. That was really, really fast. This is a gray whale being harassed by, you can see the fluke right in the mouth of the transient they're surfacing, of an adult female. And this was a video by our friend Craig Penegry. You can see, I'll just share that again. This is amazing, just drone footage showing these transients hunting. And what's even more interesting, so on the right image here, this was the gray whale calf the next day, floating at the surface. Our colleagues at Oregon Coast Aquarium went out the next day with their boat and were able to locate the calf carcass. And as you can see here, you can see the tooth rake marks all over the body of the calf. And also you can see the pectoral fin here being completely shredded. And other than those two calves, a couple days later at Cape Meares Beach, a gray whale mom and calf actually stranded themselves, and they were believed to be transients just past the surf line. So this would have been the third event of transients within this time span of just over a week, going after gray whales, which is pretty unprecedented for the Oregon coast. In particular, also being reported, and we're able to at least identify a lot of the animals that were involved. And then another one. This one here washed up in Seaside, Oregon, and a necropsy was performed by Seaside Aquarium and our colleagues at Portland State University. And it was found that it also was killed by killer whales. And as you can see here, there's some rake marks on the skin of this animal, and also you can see the pectoral fin is quite chewed up. But this would be the third confirmed gray whale calf within 2 weeks that were two confirmed killed by transients, and one suspected to be killed here by transients. So 3 calves within 2 weeks. This is really interesting. Jim Rice, he's a necropsy in the Oregon Marine Mammal Stranding Network coordinator, came across a dorsal fin washed up on the beach. And I apologize for the gruesome image, but this was really interesting because he believes it was also killed by transients. You can see there's some rake marks here, 3 rake marks, which the spacing between were kind of suggestive of transient teeth. This was a Cuvier's beaked whale, which the dorsal fin turned out to be from, which is something we really don't get many observations of killer whales attacking. And this was within an area that transients were seen within a recent period of time. So that was a really interesting observation from last year as well. But also, we also had a really sad report that we're so grateful to actually have the Oregon community involved with the Oregon Coast Killer Whale Monitoring Program. A fisherman offshore found a killer whale entangled in fishing gear. It was with recreational crab pots, and you can see here this animal here was first photographed. It was near Seaside. It was offshore, about 48 kilometers offshore. And unfortunately, they weren't able to retrieve the body. NOAA sent out reports to the Coast Guard that went searching from different units that went out looking for the carcass. because there's definitely concern that it could have been an endangered southern resident killer whale. And there was comment from people, there was rumors from people saying that it was a southern resident killer whale at one point. And then it was kind of interesting. About 4 days later, this animal it went south, and another fisherman found it off of Bandon, Oregon, and ended up was able to collect the fishing line, but once again didn't think of taking any of the samples. But which was really interesting is that this killer whale here, the fishing line, our colleagues Charles Nye at Oregon State University was able to retrieve genetics from the fishing gear, and they actually just published a paper. It came out yesterday with a journal called Aquatic Mammals, and they showed that the process of the genetics work they worked with, they were able to figure out that it was a transient, and they're not part of the West Coast population, as I mentioned earlier. But it wasn't a resident killer whale. So it's a very interesting paper if you get a chance. It's only a couple pages long, so it's not long at all. But give it a read. It was very interesting. We were very lucky to be part of the group to really track sightings of this individual and have people on the lookout and trying to get information. So what's next? Well, I'm excited to say that our group is continually growing, and next year we're actually starting to think about doing field work, both shore-based surveys where we do dedicated work where we'll have naturalists or volunteers at a couple of different locations dedicating time to looking for killer whales from the shore, as well as we're in the works of collaborating on putting together some field work with research vessels, in particular collaborating with the Oregon Coast Aquarium as well as Oregon State University. We very much collaborate with them, including doing a lot of field work with OSU. So that's kind of the next goal, is that you might see us along the beach in the next couple of months in the spring, starting to actually have educational outreach with the killer whale monitoring program. I just want to thank a lot of people that were part of this network, especially the Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition, who were able to put this presentation together today. But we also know Fisheries, the Geospatial Ecology and Marine Megafauna Lab at the Marine Mammal Institute, Cape Perpetual and Marine Reserve Collaborative, and the Oregon Coast Aquarium and Seaside Aquarium, who have all very much helped getting this project going and getting people involved and helping look back at historical sightings. So it looks like Oregon is a pretty interesting place for killer whales, and I'm hoping we'll have more information as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was great. We have some questions rolling in. If you haven't put your questions in the Q&A box yet, plenty of time to do so. Our first question comes from Kathleen, and she asks, do you have any published or soon to be published data on the southern residents along the Oregon coast?
That's a great question. So we are very interested in southern resident killer whales, but as most of our work has been on transients, and especially because there's so much work being on southern residents right now as it is, in particular, especially with Northwest Fisheries, who is down actively doing a lot of work off the Columbia River to their surveys. We provide a lot of data to them. So anything that comes in, we send it right to NOAA. And especially because they're critically endangered, it's very important to get it to NOAA, that information. I can tell you, though, we're also doing some really cool work on offshore killer whales. We're myself and a couple of colleagues, there's a fisherman, good friend of mine down there, he's a tuna fisherman in Oregon. We're reaching out to the tuna community to really start collecting information from offshore. And a lot of the fishermen out there are very interested now. His boat in particular have actually stopped working to take pictures of killer whales when they see them. So that's very cool.
Awesome. So Kathleen is part of Defenders of Wildlife, and she wanted to let us know, everybody here, we've got a lot of Oregonians in the audience, that the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission will vote on whether to list the southern residents under the state's Endangered Species Act on February 16th, so coming right up. And we need as many Oregonians as possible to help support this. And Defenders of Wildlife and Oregon Shores will be sharing more information on how everybody can help with this. So thank you for bringing this audience that we can share this message to. And then we had a few questions about what part of the gray whale do the orcas eat? Which parts are they eating? And then another one that I thought was really interesting that goes along with this was knowing how limited food is negatively impacting the survival of the southern residents. Can you explain the lack of consumption of many of the mammals hunted by the transients?
Yeah, so the first part of that question, looking at what the transients actually eat on gray whales, and the big theory and a lot of what has been known is that they eat the tongue and the lower jaw. It's been a lot in the literature, whaling literature that goes back hundreds of years that killer whales will eat the lower jaw and tongue. That's kind of their favorite part. But we're actually publishing a paper right now with our work in California in Monterey. It's just got accepted. It's our second paper, got accepted recently, that shows that they do eat other parts of the carcass. So especially down there, we've seen them eat, pectoral fins, blubber, strip the blubber off the body,
Yeah.
as well as the lower jaw. But up here, what's really interesting is that we did see a lot of the calves. It was just the lower jaw and tongue. But it also could be just timing, how much time, depth of water. So they do eat a variety of parts of the areas of the gray whales. But the other part of that question, southern residents, with the lack of food, with the lack of fish, killer whales are what we call a culture. They're very cultural species. They've adapted to specific prey that have really kind of shifted and controlled their social organization through generations or thousands of years. So being able to hunt particular prey, let's say a harbor seal or a Chinook salmon, requires two very, very different types of foraging behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So that then kind of isolates individuals to hunt and associate with others of the same mindset. So in that case, with southern residents, this is maybe one of the reasons we don't see them hunting marine mammals very often, is because the fact that they're so specialized in fish, which is completely different than marine mammals when you're trying to hunt.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then one more, it looks like we've got one more kind of on this topic. Jackie asks, are they able to bite off big chunks of flesh from a whale? Their teeth don't look like they'd work that way, like a shark, for example. I'm
That's a
curious
great question.
too.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I got to admit, I think I've got PTSD from watching a lot of these events, but we see a lot of really, it's like we get our boats really close down, especially in California, in Monterey. We get really close to try to view how the killer whales will split prey.
Mhm.
And what we see is their teeth are actually quite strong. They interlock, they're quite large. But what they do is often what we'll see a killer whale do is they'll grab onto the carcass, they'll bite in, and then they'll shake or roll like a crocodile will. Like basically they'll shake or roll, try to take off big chunks. We also have a term we call moonwalking, or they kind of grab on and they'll pump their fluke with their tail backwards, and they'll just kind of rip off a big chunk that
Wow.
way. So those are kind of some of the ways we see them feeding on the carcass, and it's kind of interesting. Gray whale skin and blubber is very, very strong, so it's definitely not easy for them to get into the carcass.
Awesome. Yeah, they're pretty efficient hunters, huh?
Mhm.
Um, Charlotte asks, I would love to see the predation data on the oceanic population group you mentioned. So many unusual species like rhesus dolphins. Any other interesting species that you've seen?
Oh, we saw the northern elephant seal. Pygmy sperm whale was really weird. With the
Yeah.
oceanics, there was adult sperm whales. So there was two reports that we reviewed that were of large groups of sperm whales that were tackled, which we just don't see with transients along the coast going after. And that paper is coming out very soon. So that will highlight all of the predation events that we've reviewed and observed ourselves. So keep an eye out. I'll post a link onto the Oregon Coast Killer Whale Monitoring Group Facebook group. I'll post a link so people can access the publication right away.
Perfect. And then Jackie again asks, great questions, Jackie. When they are playing with their prey, is there any evidence that they're teaching calves to hunt, or do they play with their food regardless of the presence of calves?
No, it's definitely, the predation I showed of the harbor seal there that was being tackled off Newport. That was actually an event where a young individual was 2 years old, was actually involved in the actual predation event. And they spent more time, like the seal definitely was not difficult to tackle for these large predators. So they spent about 15 minutes just toying with it and playing with it. So and the calf was really involved. And just to give you kind of a side information, we see with gray whale predation events, it's really interesting, is calves will be right beside their mothers, right in between a big, like a gray whale mother and their calf. So they get
Mhm.
right in there.
Wow.
And it's likely so important for them to learn how to hunt at an early age so they can start to specialize and later on be able to use that behavior to survive.
Awesome. Let's see, we've got so many good ones coming in. Jill, hi Jill. Jill Marks asks, Cape Perpetua or Cape Foulweather? We have drone footage of the gray whale calf getting killed this past summer. Wondering if I missed it or if there were two different gray whale calf killings witnessed. Also, do you think this is simply a teaching lesson for orcas since they aren't eating it?
Oh, so yeah, I apologize. It was Cape Foulweather. Thanks, Jill.
Okay.
So many capes, I'm still getting used to them. I know it was Cape Foulweather, and they did eat the lower jaw and the tongue of the gray whale that was off Cape Foulweather. So it was likely part of a teaching. But what was really weird is that was in such shallow water. But
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense because a lot of the reports we've gotten that were never, they're anecdotal reports from people without photographs. It was close to shore where they were hiking along the beach. We have about 10 anecdotal reports of gray whales being hunted by transients. So now we're actually, we got the community involved. People are actually really excited to report this information, and that we now know that transients or killer whales in general aren't very rare off Oregon. They're definitely around. I think it's more of an effort thing where
Mhm.
initially people just took photographs and then kept them on their private Facebook or on your private
Mhm.
Instagram. And now that we have this group formed where people can actually share information, we're able to get a lot of this information that was kept privately, which is great.
Awesome. On that same vein, David asks, what is the best part to photograph for identification purposes?
Oh, yeah, great question. Thanks, Dave. That's a great question. So I shared that one slide showing the dorsal fin and that gray saddle patch. Either side of the fin with the
Mhm.
gray saddle patch is super important. And that enables us to identify what whale was there as well as the ecotype. So for us, that's major important because we're now able to identify new transients that have never been cataloged off Oregon before. So if
Mhm.
you submit anything like that, that would be very helpful.
Great. Roy asks, are the AT1 transients genetically distinct or what sets them apart from the Gulf transients?
Yeah, so the Gulf of Alaska, AT1s, and the West Coast transients are all genetically distinct. They form three different populations. The AT1s have never been seen associating with the Gulf of Alaska, even though they overlap in their distribution. Um, and that is kind of a bit of their downfall when it comes to
Mhm.
this situation is that they're not inbreeding with that population, interbreeding, sorry. So that is a pretty sad situation
Yeah.
overall. The population, though, when it was first discovered, was only 22 whales in 1984.
Wow.
So it declined to 13 whales after the Exxon Valdez oil spill.
Mhm.
So the oil spill was believed to have very much harmed a lot of the killer whale populations in the Gulf of Alaska. Even the residents were hit pretty hard. But the Gulf of Alaska transients, because of their distribution is so much further into the ocean islands and outward, they may have avoided being
Okay.
impacted by the oil spill at that point. Sorry, that's a
Interesting.
little bit extra information.
And then we have a question from Jenny about another more specific group. The B1 orcas have such a unique team approach to predation. Do transients use similar tactics?
Yeah, so the B1s, the Antarctic B1s, I'm assuming, use that wave washing behavior to knock seals off ice floes. Transients in their own right have their very own specific behaviors. So, for instance, being able to hunt in very shallow water. Some of these coastal transients can be in water that's 6 to 7 feet deep. They don't have a seal. That's pretty specialized behavior. We published a paper in 2019 showing a group of transients in the coastal population that actually intentionally stranded
Oh,
to grab
wow.
harbor seals on the beach. And it's only ever, and it happened at, um, it happened, it was off of an island in Washington. There was only two events. One in the 90s happened at the same location that are, I can't try to remember the island right now. But they both happened this one island in Puget Sound, and it was intentional stranding. So very, very
Mm.
specialized behavior.
Wow. And then another kind of feeding question we have from Valerie, wants to know how much food does an orca need to consume daily, or do they go a few days without eating? And then Devin asks about the southern residents, since they eat salmon and their population is dwindling, have we seen any signs of them adopting new diets?
That's a great question. Those are all very great questions. With killer whales, I mean, captive killer whales in captivity, they've done some studies looking at the amount of food that they'll eat per day, and it was guessed that male killer whales can get up to 300 pounds of food per day,
Wow.
which is quite a bit. Yeah, it's close to 5% of their body mass, which doesn't seem like a lot for a killer whale that can, like a male killer whale that can be up to 15,000 pounds. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is quite a bit.
Yeah.
For though, like, can they go through periods without food? Yeah, definitely they can. We do know with transients they need roughly around one harbor seal per day.
Hmm.
But like most apex predators, they can eat more than they need, as well as go without food for a period of time. So, for instance, in one of our studies in Monterey, California, with gray whales, the average group size of transient killer whales down there during the spring months was 15 whales.
Oh, wow.
Um, so they'd kill a gray whale that roughly weighed around 900 kilograms. Sorry, I'm Canadian, don't have the pounds for that. But they'll eat a gray whale costs about 900 kilograms. They need they can kill they need a gray whale calf every 5 days. So they'll
Wow.
consume a gray whale calf every 5 days. Is for a group of 15. They'll need a gray whale calf every 5 days. Is one of the calculations that we did. So they can go without food for some time, but they can also gorge a lot too as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I guess you'd
Oh,
have to be adaptable out there.
yeah, and the southern resident question: why have they, adapted to other fish particularly? That question still kind of they're still wondering. We do know
Mhm.
they eat other salmon. They'll eat chum. They'll eat chinook. But the northern residents are actually really interesting. And off the outer coast of Washington, we do know the northern residents, just like the southern residents, will eat Chinook salmon as their main fish. But fishermen are reporting off of the outer coast of Washington that sablefish, which is a black
Mm.
cod, the killer
Mhm.
whales are actually taking the fish off the fishing lines. And these are
Wow.
northern residents. Yeah, northern resident killer whales are doing it. So they are eating halibut and
Mhm.
sablefish from fishing lines. So the northern residents show it seems to have that more flexibility in their diet.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm really interested to hear what more research comes out from that. Jenny asks if there are any recorded interactions between orcas and great white sharks.
Yeah, so they're the two top predators. This inter-guild feeding competition, we call it. There is. We know in California that offshore it was a offshore killer whale. There was also a group called the LA pod that were seen in the Farallon Islands, and one
Mhm.
of the animals killed a great white. Um, and after they killed the great white shark, they ate the liver and left the rest of the shark. And all the great white sharks in the area actually disappeared for 3 weeks.
Wow.
They just left the Farallon Islands, disappeared. In other areas where it's more common is South Africa. There's a couple of killer whales there that named Port and Starboard because their fins flop over to one side on each side. They have been known to actually tackle great white sharks, and it's actually changed the ecosystem in South Africa because the white sharks have now disappeared from the area because of their presence. So.
Wow. On a similar note, Aditi asks, are there any recordings of killer whales, not sure what ecotype would do this, feeding on rays like those off the coast of New Zealand?
Yeah, so New Zealand is the one I was thinking of initially. So eating stingrays, but also um, in Baja, California.
Mhm. Oh,
There's
wow.
killer whales down there that'll eat mobula rays, which are not stingrays, but they're a ray And there's a group down there. We know they're called the Eastern Tropical Pacific killer whales that
Mhm.
seem to feed on rays quite frequently.
Awesome. Okay. And then Elijah asks, there's a lot of bioacoustic research on southern residents in Washington. Is there a hydrophone network in Oregon or future plans to establish one?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I was in Oregon last year. I was heading down to Monterey for our field work, and I stopped in to visit the Oregon Coast Aquarium. And we've had conversations with them to hook up a hydrophone potentially, talking with other members too as well. Lighthouses to actually put hydrophones in. So our team is actually avidly looking at trying to collaborate with an organization down there, and it sounds like there is some push that we might be able to get a hydrophone set up.
That's awesome. So we're just after 7 now. The final question that we'll take is from Bruce, and Bruce wants to know when you will be offering the hoodies. So if this doesn't make sense to anybody, the Oregon Killer Whale Monitoring Facebook group has the great logo that you saw. They've teased hoodies coming out, so Bruce and all of us want to know when those will be available.
Okay, so we did a little beta run. Yeah, we do have sweatshirts. We have poster sweatshirts. We have t-shirts coming. The hoodies, we did a beta run to make sure that they worked okay. We found a couple things, like we wanted to make a logo bigger a bit. We wanted to, there's certain things like that we wanted to do. So I think in the next 2 weeks we'll put out an order. And we had to build a website. We built a website for the shipping. So in the next 2 weeks, Bruce, I'll post a thing on the Oregon Coast group, and a hoodie will be there for you. We have green, blue, sky blue, black, and I think white. So a few colors.
Awesome. So I just shared the name of the group, if that's easier for people to find on Facebook there, the Oregon Coast Killer Whale Monitoring Program. Facebook group is awesome, very active. Love to see that. So as we wrap up here, anybody who is here that lives in Oregon and wants to get involved in more community science projects, I'd encourage you to check out our CoastWatch program. So our Coast Watchers are a network of volunteers who adopt a mile of the Oregon coast. There's no financial obligation to become a Coast Watcher, just a commitment to visit your mile and complete a Coast Watch report on our website once a season. And our Coast Watchers also get connected to many different community science projects on the Oregon coast. So we're looking forward to helping out with these killer whale sightings even more. So here's the link to our CoastWatch program. And again, thank you everybody for coming out. Thank you so much, Josh, for talking with us tonight. Again, Oregon Shores, we're a nonprofit, and our work is possible because everybody has shown up to support us, whether that's following us on social media, subscribing to our newsletter, or making a gift. So thank you all for being here today. We're also interested in hearing if anybody has any ideas about future presentations that they want to see from us, or if you want us to have Josh back to talk about something, his research as it gets published, we'd be happy to do that. I'm going to put my email in the chat there for anybody that wants to reach out with any questions or ideas. And with that, thank you so much, Josh. Have a great night. Thanks everybody for attending.
Bye.